Welcome to the final episode of TyskySour at the World Transformed. Thank you. Very big names.
Cronenberg.
David Lammy MP. You can check out his rants on Twitter. Some of them go viral.
Rants?
Yeah. I mean, you're paid to give rants, aren't you? That's what an LBC host has to do.
I think they're more poetic than rants, Michael. Come on.
Grace Blakeley, economics commentator at The New Statesman, regular contributor on all of our shows at Novara Media, author of Stolen, How to Save the World from Financialisation, which I think sold out in 2 weeks, right?
Available in all good bookstores. Yes, we have now done a new edition, so it is still available in all good bookstores. Please do go and buy it. You can also, you could buy it from TWT, not anymore. So, yeah, get it while it's hot.
And I'm also joined by Paul Mason, writer and commentator, whose most recent book was called Clear, Bright Future, A Radical Defence of the Human Being. Thank you for joining us this evening, Paul.
A pleasure.
We're going to start with the day's big events. So this is outside of Labour Party conference. The Supreme Court found that Boris Johnson had acted illegally, or not within the law at least, when he prorogued Parliament. Parliament will be meeting tomorrow. You'll be going back to London tonight, David, to sit in the chamber. Will this seriously damage Boris Johnson, or is this a kind of SW1 Westminster story? I'll start with you.
Look, I don't think it's a Westminster story. This is a huge story. This guy lied to the Queen. This guy.
You're going to have to make it seem like you believe that the next time you say that on TV.
No, seriously, he has a project that is about dismantling the democracy that we have known. And part of it was to deny parliamentarians the opportunity to scrutinise what he's up to, the fact that he's not serious about a deal, and basically we're now going to pin him to the ground, and he can't shut down Parliament. So his game plan has changed. We can hold him to account. We can call him into the chamber. We can watch his every act, and not just him. Michael Gove, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the lot of them. So I think this is big. I actually seriously think he should be resigning, because this was a unanimous verdict, a unanimous finding that it was unlawful, and that he basically told fibs to do this. So I hope it's much more than a Westminster story, but I suspect he won't resign. I think he's shameless. He's a bit like his mate across the Atlantic, Trump, takes it all from a textbook, so he won't be resigning, but we will force his hand, and he certainly isn't going to just crash us out of the European Union with no deal, which is what he wants.
And I just want to pin down you, because I'm a bit worried you're going to get back to the House of Commons and not have much to do, because there's not really a legislative agenda. I know, and it seems like you're not going to go for a vote of no confidence. You've already, delayed or ruled out no deal. So what is there to achieve when you're back there?
Well, look, actually, let us just remember that there are other things around other than Brexit. We lost the domestic violence bill, actually, and we should care a lot about domestic violence and doing something about it. And I was on a WhatsApp group. You know what it's like, MPs are on WhatsApp groups these days.
You weren't plotting, were you, David?
No,
Was it called It'll Go Higher?
I do not participate in the plotting. But rightly, someone said, look, I actually wanted to raise an urgent question about the situation in Hong Kong. So, in truth, I wanted to raise issues around the hurricane in the Bahamas. So, there are lots of things going on in the world and in our own country other than Brexit, and I was denied the opportunity to do my job, and now I can do my job. That's the point.
I think the reason that this will affect Johnson less than perhaps we would want it to hinges on the phrase that you used in the first answer to your question, democracy as we've known it. The kind of narrative that we on the left have, I suppose, fallen into has been this defend democracy line, right? And I think that the reason that this doesn't resonate with people as much as we would like to think is because most people know that we don't really live in a real democracy, because most of our democratic institutions are controlled by a tiny number of people who use them to deliver outcomes that benefit them. You know, a lot of the institutions that determine the majority of stuff that happens in our lives, particularly around the economy, are governed by unaccountable technocrats. When you talk about, you know, the judiciary, right, a classic beloved liberal institution, it's often been used against the left historically, because, you know, there are these institutions that are supposed to exist, I suppose, to reinforce and support the status quo, even as the way that they function grows out of the status quo in the sense of the power relations that exist on the ground. So I think the problem that we have at the moment is that we are trying to defend a democracy that is essentially indefensible because it has been captured by vested interests, by economic and political elites, and it just isn't working for the vast majority of people. And that's part of the reason that we got Brexit in the first place, is because people feel voiceless, disempowered, ignored, and basically unable to exercise any agency in the vast majority of the decisions that affect their lives. We need not to defend democracy, we need a radical rethinking of what democracy means. That means handing people power back over the big decisions, you know, the big institutions that affect them. That means a big program of decentralization. It means extending the principles of political democracy into the realm of the economy. So I'm skeptical about how much appealing to liberal democratic norms is going to piss people off as much as we think it should. These, you know, most people don't have any identification with these institutions, and that's because our democracy is broken.
Like that.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one could subscribe to that analysis, but still say it's a massive moment, because the way I look at it is that both in America and here, and in many countries, the elite has split. There's a set of the elite, like the boss of Airbus, who wants Remain and wants a rules-based multilateral order, because if you're selling aircraft across the world, it has to be the same product in every market. There's a section of the elite that want chaos. So who likes chaos? People with computers like Renaissance Technologies, Mercer, Trump's main backer, who can trade chaos. The people who bet £8 billion on Brexit. The people who bet 200 million in credit default swaps on the failure of Thomas Cook. They need the failure of Thomas Cook. No, that section of the elite is prepared to back a guy who will destroy the formal democracy that we have. I.e., the executive power is under the control of Parliament. And I think the way I would put, I was asked in a seminar I did the other week by some theatre makers who work in the inner city. They said, tell me why a 15-year-old black kid in Hackney should defend democracy. That's what they said. They were black theatre makers. And I thought for a while, well, here's why. Where I live in South London, Elephant and Castle, the most important shop on the high street is a solicitor's. Because it's there where people who are migrants or they've got a bad dealer of some brush with the law, that's their first line of defence. Likewise, the cops spend all their time going into people's houses, stopping domestic violence. That's reality in a poor community. All the executive has to do is look the other way, and the cops can ignore the domestic violence, and the solicitor can't get you off your immigration problem. And I'm old enough to remember when the cops could take you in the cells and there was no tape machine, yeah? And what happened is what happens on that TV series Life on Mars. They beat the shit out of people. And I think people realise that if the rich are allowed to just break the law, then the poor have got no recourse to the law. And I think that's how I would put it to the 15-year-old kid. And it's what I think makes this moment where you say a section of the elite is prepared to lie to the Queen, screw our constitutional democracy, prorogue Parliament, is a huge moment. And yeah, I agree with you. We're not going to defeat them by appealing to the sort of norms, because most people don't have any. The liberal democratic norms are important to us to function. We want to be in a democracy, but the way we do it is we show that we've got to be as radical and actually as rule-breaking in a way as Johnson is, because he is popular. You've got to get maybe not in Brighton, but parts of Britain that voted Leave, he's popular.
We're going to get onto the big picture about how to, beat Boris Johnson a little bit later. First of all, I want to talk, I suppose, in the short term and parliamentary strategy, and there's various messages coming from front bench politicians, actually. So Barry Gardner today on Politics Live was saying that Labour should go for a second referendum before they go for a general election. Presumably that would mean having some sort of vote of no confidence in a government of national unity. None of the other frontbench positions, none of the other frontbench politicians, I was speaking to Becky Long-Bailey today, seem to be committing to a vote of no confidence. It seems very unclear what the strategy for Labour is to take advantage of this situation. I'll start with you, Paul.
Well, when Johnson challenged us to have an election, I said we should have gone for one. I think we should have put conditions on it, but we should. I mean, in the end, we didn't. And I think now, I went into this conference thinking, as soon as we can, vote of no confidence, okay, an election. But I now think, as soon as we can, vote of no confidence and try and form an interim government. And the reason I think that is because only some form of interim government is going to take this guy's hand off the tiller. Remember, he's threatened, he has not withdrawn his threat to defy the Benn Act. It may be the Benn Act is ruled not to have been passed now, we don't know. But the Benn Act is the one that forces him to do the extension. He's saying that, number one. He's saying he'll break the law. He's saying he doesn't agree with the judges. I mean, you know, this is not a legal status for a player in politics to not agree with a legal ruling. Part of his team want to go the full force, the full insurrectionary force against the entire system. And I think we need to get them out of power before they're out. They're putting out these Leni Riefenstahl-style and semi-Nazi propaganda videos made by civil servants, with civil servants and serving military people as walk-on extras paid for by us. We've got to get them out of power. And I think that if we can, vote of no confidence. Jeremy Corbyn goes to the palace and says, I can form a minority government that gets us maybe to a referendum or maybe to an election. It depends what the balance of forces are in Parliament. That's what I would do, because the moment, it's a dramatic moment, and I think many of us here feel this to be a dramatic moment. It frustrates me that the party, the Labour Party, thinks of everything usually in terms of economic. What does it mean about the economy? No, it actually is a politically dramatic moment, and we need to out-drama them to detonate our class, our people, our Labour people, to understand we're fighting now for, not the liberal democracy, but for our right to be able to act.
How do you feel about interim? Or actually, I just want to clarify first of all. It doesn't seem like the MPs would support an interim government led by Jeremy Corbyn. So how would you feel about an interim government led by someone else?
Well, I'd feel less good about it. So I feel less good about it.
Even me?
No, I think, David, what we're all looking at, it's going to be Ken Clarke, or it's going to be, it could be Liddington, it could be a Tory who's not yet been expelled, or it could be a Labour grandee. I mean, all it has to do is get us out of the mess of having a guy with his hands and fingers on power that is misusing power.
Grace, you're making faces.
The idea of this just absolutely terrifies me. I mean, the narrative that the Tories and the most extreme end of the Tories and the Brexit Party would be able to spin out of a government of national unity with Liberals, moderate Tories, nice people from Labour, whoever else, coming together to frustrate the will of the people. I mean, of course, we don't think that's what it would actually be about. Yeah, we know that it would be an attempt to get an extension from the European Union so that we could have an election in due course and everything could go well. But the narrative that will be spun around that would be so powerful. It would basically be a confirmation of Johnson's narrative that this is the people versus Parliament. This deep sense of anger that I was talking about earlier that people feel against our institutions almost indiscriminately, right? Which in 2017 we were able to transform into a class antagonism that got us really close to power, basically because we were able to transform that generalized anger and disempowerment into a sense of, oh shit, wait, the reason that I've been fucked over for such a long time is because I am a person who earns their living from work, and the vast majority of people who make all the rules, who own all the stuff, who tell me what to do, who make decisions about my life in this country, are the people who control the resources, extract my labor, and get rich off my work. That's a really powerful narrative that we haven't seen come about in a very, very long time. It's the narrative that delivers victories for socialist governments whenever it is the defining polarization in society. And molding together this weird coalition of people who just fundamentally don't even see that antagonism, let alone want to run an election on it. It blunts our message so much.
But what do we do?
For me, we need an election. Yeah. And I mean, that is difficult to see how we get to that election. I agree with you. I think we should have gone for one gone from one when it was first touted, not least because we spent the last 3 years saying not a second referendum and election, and then when we got the chance to have it, suddenly that was gone. I think that was a kind of strategic mistake on our part. It is difficult to see, though, yes, how we will get to the path to an election. But then again, we're in really unprecedented times. I mean, I don't want to sound trite, but what happens now, and I think this is a general point about the period of history that we're living in, a period where institutions, norms, narratives are breaking down. There's a huge amount more contingency. There's the institutions that usually govern how we make sense of the world and the things that we do and how we live our lives have less power over us, and we're increasingly feeling this sense of chaos, which on the one hand is scary, but also increases people's power to change things. I think that's also, applying to how this political situation is going to play out, because it's 100% true. This is a big constitutional test. There is really no reason that Johnson has to do what Parliament's forced him to do, right? The question we now have is who speaks for the British state? Does the executive speak for the British state? If they don't go to the European Parliament and say, we want an extension, can the legislature speak for the British state? That would be not just a kind of mad thing in terms of British constitutionalism, but in terms of international law, right? So I genuinely don't know what's going to happen, but I really think we do need to mobilise around this message of an election now, and maybe it's too late for that because we missed out on our opportunity before, but that's basically what we need.
Well, I mean, the path, on a practical level, the path to a general election is still pretty simple. The Tories are saying they want one. The Labour Party at the moment is saying we're not willing to vote for one. But if they change their position tomorrow to wheel back a general election, then presumably there'd be the 2/3 majority you need in Parliament to make it happen.
Yeah, if we could get that 2/3 majority.
If that happened, if the leadership tomorrow decide, David, that they want a general election, would you vote for it?
No. Sorry. Look, I've got to just go back a bit because I agree with a lot that you say, Grace, but I just don't want us to completely blow up hot air up our backsides that where we got to in 2017 was entirely because of the class analysis, entirely because of this wonderful manifesto. We also got to where we got in 2017 because Theresa May was crap. She was hopeless. She was a terrible campaigner. Even on her own agenda, she was screwing over part of her own electorate. Her stuff on care and things like that went down very badly with older Conservative voters. So we've just got to balance out our analysis of why we got much closer in 2017 than we actually got. Look, the bottom line is, my view is that the Leave Remain story, however you analyse why we have got to this point, is the biggest story, certainly in the 20 years I've been in politics. And very sadly, we have to accept that it is a bigger immediacy than the issues that we want to talk about.
Even climate change.
For the electorate.
This is the...
Not for me, for the electorate. And so my point is this. Deal with Brexit. Deal with it. Pick a side. Have a referendum. Make a decision and move forward. And then can we fight a general election on our own terms? Do not fight a Brexit general election. I have to say, my view is that going into that election, where you're effectively taking a neutral position and where you're saying to the electorate, back me because I will then go and negotiate a deal. There's now a lot of cynicism about a deal. There's a lot of cynicism about the ability to negotiate a deal. Never mind the position of what you take once you've got that deal. I'm afraid is not a great position to be in. We may keep some of those northern seats, but I can see already seats in London where people are voting Liberal Democrat. So my view is deal with Brexit and then move on to the general election and fight that general election on austerity and on our own terms.
I want to park the question of a general election for a moment and just talk about the practicalities of what you're suggesting. So you're suggesting we have a second referendum before a general election, which, I mean, on one level means there's no mandate for it.
You do need a deal first.
Yeah, but I mean, so what? That's what was my question was going to be. What would the deal be? So if Labour in an election and they negotiate, they would have a mandate to negotiate a new Brexit deal and then put it to the people. How would this government of national unity have any mandate to decide what was on the ballot?
It couldn't. It couldn't. Theresa
But
May's
you're
done-
kind of proposing this.
No,
You think that we could have a
Theresa
referendum
May's,
before an
Theresa
election?
May's done a deal.
That's right.
Boris Johnson hasn't, in 30 days since Merkel offered him the chance, hasn't suggested any changes to it. Remember, there's the withdrawal agreement, which is a legal document. There's a political declaration which can be changed because it isn't. And the withdrawal agreement is unchangeable as far as I can see. And therefore, you go, there's what Theresa May did. Here's we, Labour, Remain. Take your choice. No, in other words, you would be able to say, if it were possible to do an early referendum, remember, you don't have to do 6 months. If it were possible, you'd say, there's the deal. We can, we'd like to add the following to it, but to be honest, there it is. Here's Remain, which we support, which Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, in London Labour Party, 2/3 of the MPs support, but then we'll give you the choice. You've been wanting the choice. A lot of you are complaining that your vote's been taken away. Well, no, you can have another one. There you go. There's the referendum. That's why I'm actually satisfied, although I fought against it, I'm completely satisfied with what came out of the Labour Party conference yesterday, because now we've got the whole party which opposed the PV. A lot of people opposed it, now very morally invested in that second referendum. They want that because that's our way of getting out of this.
Yeah.
I think what David said, that Leave Remain is now the dividing line in any election, and the Labour Party just has to accept that. I think as long as Leave,
we have to deal with it.
Well, yeah, okay, fine. But I think as long as Leave Remain is, the dichotomy along which politics is polarised, there isn't really a path to an electoral majority for Labour. I don't think that's controversial. The Leave Remain divide cuts across our coalition, and just in terms of the electoral calculus, you can imagine a situation. I mean, obviously, the Lib Dems, if this is a pure Leave Remain thing, undercut a massive amount of our vote. You can imagine a situation, the kind of most horrific situation we can possibly imagine, where Johnson takes up Farage's offer of a deal, and those former Labour voters in the north of the country who voted Leave would never consider voting Tory, but would consider voting for the Brexit Party, vote for the Brexit Party, deliver some sort of coalition between the Tories and the Brexit Party, which, yes, does present an existential threat to the Tory party because of the Liberals that exist within its ranks, but which could potentially deliver them a path to a majority, and when they got that majority would completely reshape British politics, basically along the lines of the disaster capitalism that we were just talking about. I don't think we have a choice other than to fight this election, try to get an election and to fight it on our terms, and to fight it on those class terms. And the class terms that this conference has massively delivered, right? I mean, I include climate change, by the way, because climate change is a class issue. If we go into this election with the kinds of policies that we've just seen conference deliver, abolishing private schools, net zero by 2030, I mean, hopefully we'll get a strong stance on extending freedom of movement and ending indefinite detention tomorrow, so that this narrative that divides working people based on where they come from, on how they look, on what they believe in, is undercut, and we do come to conceive of ourselves, as we rightly should, as a group of people who are united based on our experience of exploitation. Then that's the only path I can see for Labour to get to power at this point. And it really requires us to have a message that says, and this is why I kind of think, I mean, I know everyone, and Piers Morgan was shouting down the telly at me this morning saying, Jeremy Corbyn's an idiot, how can you go into this election not taking a position, da 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 da. But I sympathise with the idea that he is attempting to unite a coalition and undermine the salience of this division, not ignoring it, saying we need a solution, we need a technical solution to Brexit, and actually saying, but ultimately, the biggest problems in our country, the biggest issues to which we need solutions, are not based on this Leave Remain divide. They're based on the divide between people who live off work and people who live off wealth. We're going to develop policy and build a campaign that's based on that.
Can I just come back?
Okay.
I've got to come back because I just want to challenge a bit. Trust me on getting this technical solution when other politicians, Theresa May, have failed. Trust me. And as much as this audience believe in Jeremy Corbyn, I want to believe in Jeremy Corbyn. In the end, winning a general election is about that public perception. And you yourself have started with Brexit and then moved on to the rest. So that's why I want to emphasise the rest. I also want to just say, and it's a little bit emotional, but I want to say it, part of where I stand in the ground on this is determined by the fact that I'm sitting here as a black man. And the gamble of a general election is about who gets to govern this country for another period. And what black and minority communities are facing with the prospect of Boris and Farage and others is seriously frightening, seriously frightening. And I remember being a young black child, growing up in Tottenham, and praying that Michael Foot would win, and he didn't. And we had Thatcherism for 18 years. And there are few communities in this country who suffered more than black communities in places like Tottenham. So that's why I take the prospect of losing a general election so very, very seriously. And let me tell you this. If Trump gets the second term in the United States of America, what that means for the global community is terrifying. Because in the end, I've seen over the last 20 years, when the Thatchers, the Blairs, the Clintons, the Trumps come along, if they get that second term, the copycat effect across the world, this model works, is huge. We're already seeing it. Brazil, Hungary and other places. So the point is this, that we better be damn sure that we're ready to win a general election. Because there's a lot of people who are very vulnerable, who are a long way from this room, who need Labour to win a general election. And in this Leave, Remain cycle, an election that is on those terms, with us in a neutral position, feels perilous.
How can we win an election on those terms?
Let's get Paul.
We won't be in a neutral position. You'll stand for Remain, I'll stand for Remain, the Scottish Labour, Welsh Labour, Northern Irish Labour, London Labour, Manchester Labour will be for Remain.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, however, see, I think the difference is, between us, I see Brexit as a class issue. I don't see, when it started, I tried to be a kind of mild Lexiteer. I tried to say, well, there is a way we could come a little bit out of Europe and without much damage. But what it's become the project of the far right. Right. It's become, I mean, the fascists shouting at me, we've researched you, you're a Marxist. The only people, on Whitehall, they're no longer boneheads, they're no longer just drunks, they're people who've researched us all, yeah? They probably know where we live. And yeah, I'm a white man, I have privilege compared to you. But remember, one reason why this is a class...
Thank you for saying that. So few do say
Well, let's remember another group. There are 3 million British members of the British working class for whom Brexit is the #1 issue. And that's the EU citizens. They are going to see their levels of insecurity and stress are rising. Yeah. So much the way I know what you mean about, if I could just sweep it all aside and talk about, climate change, economics, etc., I would, but I see us having to go through it. And what makes me inspired to do that is my old, Leninist training. Lenin was the person who said to the Russian Marxists, look, you're interested in strikes in economics. There's a revolution about democracy going on. Don't forget that democracy is a class issue. And don't forget that the national question, so like in Ireland, the Irish national question is a class issue. We can't, for the left, we can't say everything's just about workers versus bosses. Sometimes it's about democracy versus fascism. And I'm afraid, I want us to just try and, I don't think there's a huge difference between any of us here, because we all want to, I want to have an election, to be honest. And I want to risk it all. And I want us to really put down the chips on the table on an election.
Can I just say, I think you're like a therapist. This is actually making me feel a lot better than I've been feeling up to this point.
Can I just comment on that? Because I think...
You're like a therapist. It's a great chat-up line, isn't it? You're like a therapist.
Should we just all kind of get out our toxic masculinity?
Honest, you make me feel better about myself isn't always a compliment.
Sorry.
What was I going to say? Brexit is a class issue. I think Brexit is a class issue as well. And the reason I think Brexit is a class issue is because I think for a portion of people who voted Leave, I basically think, this cuts across class in some ways, because the Leave vote, the Leave coalition is a mix of wealthy people who live in the shires and basically don't have much to lose from Brexit because, they own their homes outright and they basically don't particularly like immigration, and these appeals to sovereignty basically kind of strike some sort of weird chord in their identities. And a bunch of people who have been left out of decision-making, alienated from politics, unable to kind of have any voice in their workplaces, and wanted to give a kicking to the status quo. For those people, and actually for a lot of people outside of that coalition that we haven't really been able to activate because we haven't built up this narrative, Brexit is a class issue because the form of globalization that we've had over the last 40 years, of financial globalization, where you've seen a liberalization of capital controls, the ability of the wealthiest in society to move their money all around the world and undermine democratic decisions by nation states to say, we want to tax you at X rate, we want to subject you to X regulation, is basically subjected to the ruthless discipline of the market mechanism, whereby if you don't do the types of things that these companies want you to do, that these investors want you to do, then you face capital flight, you face your Mitterrand moment, and your government is undermined. There was that famous quote, I'm not going to get it right, but it was Friedman about, it wasn't Friedman, who was Friedman?
Don't look at me, I've got no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what this quote's going to be.
It doesn't matter who's going to win the next. Asked who do you want to win the next election. It doesn't matter who wins the next election because luckily we live in a world where markets ultimately decide most of the economic policy that takes place in this country. And there is, I think, still, obviously, right, immigration and concerns about immigration and this kind of divisive narrative that has, been used by the far right to seek to split working people all around the world and basically encourage us to get at one another for the exploitation and the oppression that's ultimately imposed by the people at the very top. Yes, that was a significant factor, but the anger that was exploited, the sense that these people, don't really have that voice, that they have been, trodden over, that they've been exploited, that they've been oppressed, etc. That was real. It was directed.
Was it right?
Well, yes, and I think partly because of the kind of globalization that we've had, right? Because we've had economic powers sucked up to the top, because we've had removal of restrictions on capital mobility, because we've had the rise of huge multinational corporations that exist outside of the remit of the nation state to regulate.
You think
and
the vote for Brexit was it might have been a correct analysis, but it was the wrong decision to make,
I think
given that analysis.
You're absolutely right. There was a class element to why people voted Brexit. Absolutely right. But let's remember how it's expressed in our popular media. While we're sitting here, the Sun and the Mail are calling us lovies. Even you as pro-Brexit, yeah? They're calling us lovies who are above them. And for the class struggle that the Sun wants is the struggle of people with, who don't believe experts, don't believe science, don't believe rationality, against educated people. And one of the biggest indicators of voting for Trump, and I would imagine Brexit as well, is this fatalism that tells you, don't go to university, it's not worth it. Now, for me, the Labour movement was always a line drawn through a working class community in favour of progressive politics here, and saying to people, come on, there is a future for us. And therefore, what you have to answer, if you're going to support Brexit, and say it's a class issue, is are they right to be angry at the foreign workers? See, I will say to them...
Of course not.
No, well, you're not.
But they're right to be angry at the EU, the IMF, the World Bank,
and so am I. It's the socialism of fools. It's the socialism of fools to be anti-migrant.
Of course.
Yeah. So tell them.
I totally agree.
I can see you're going to be next, but first of all, you're watching TyskySour, you're watching Novara Media. David Lammy is going to go back to Parliament tomorrow. We're going to go back to Novara Media Studio, and to be honest, it's substandard, which is why we are currently launching a campaign to move to a new one. So we are now collecting one-off donations, trying to get up to 15 grand so we can move up the road closer to the station so we can get David on more often. It will be a shorter walk. And as ever, this whole operation is only possible because of your kind support. So our ask is for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Please go to support.novaramedia.com. As ever, thank you to the volunteers at The World Transformed. They have put on a great show, as they do every year. I want to move us on to two issues slightly separate from Brexit, one being Well, I suppose we're facing a different Tory party to we did in 2017. You're absolutely right. And it seems to me that the Conservative election strategy is threefold, which is to say, we are the party of democracy because we're the party of Brexit. We are the party of law and order because we know you like it. And we are the party who are willing to fund the NHS because we'll do what you want us to do.
That should
right?
be Navarro
So-
Media's slogan, because we know you like it.
Yeah, exactly. Support.navarromedia.com, because we know you like it. How do, other than Brexit, because we've discussed it a lot, although I am sort of desperate to know what you were itching to say before, so feel free to link that into the answer, yeah. How do we deal with the social authoritarianism of the Conservatives? So they are going to hammer us on being weak on crime, I think. And how do we not get drowned out by them no longer being the party of austerity, at least discursively? I'll start with you.
Well, look, I was going to say that because it links to what was being said there, the sort of class analysis of Brexit. I just think we've got to be a bit careful, because this came out of the Trump victory and the analysis that the Democrats and others were trying to do in the States. And there was a big divide between those that wanted to talk about the Rust Belt, Middle America, lack of jobs, industry moving to China, etc., etc., and a significant community within the Democrat, in fact, the key to whoever gets the presidency, which is the African and American Latino vote, who smelt white supremacy. That's what they smelt right across the Trump campaign, and a calling card and a sounding card that really encourage people to vote to feel supreme once again. And I've got to assert quite clearly that that is a significant feature of the Brexit campaign. That's why they had the posters with all the Turks that are going to arrive. That's why when you knock on doors, people say it's the immigrants. Even if you're in the northeast and you're struggling to find the immigrants, it's still the immigrants and their fault. So I've just got to be insistent that the analysis is not entirely economic, it is cultural as well. And that brings us on to the current formula. So Cameron's formula, and you might have forgotten that Bush ran as a compassionate conservative first time round, was, let's be liberal, same-sex marriage, race disparity audit. I'll ask David Lammy to do a review on the criminal justice system. Tough on immigration. They were tough on immigration. And then fiscally incredibly conservative, right? The new formula is spend. Let's try and I don't know if they're going to outspend the left, but let's splash money
Not at this
around.
rate, not with these policy announcements we've had at conference.
Forget the deficit, but sod the liberal stuff. Let's get into the authoritarianism. It seems to me that you have to meet the argument seriously, and we have to be bold and brave about our conviction. And what worries me with our abandonment on things like free movement, why is it that I had to be absolutely clear that I was not prepared to support a Labour Party that was prepared to abstain on the last immigration bill? We've got to fight and be there on the ground to stand up to that. Of course we should not be just banging people in jail. Of course prison should be up for reform. We do need more policing, but it's what the police do, so it's neighbourhood policing. We've got to be there making those arguments. And I've got to say, too often, the wonderful things have come out of conference and wonderful things are in our last manifesto. But the narrative story we want to tell, what is it really? What is the story we are selling to the public? Because too often the debates feel tribal, they feel small, we feel like we're responding to events, not leading events. There isn't the narrative story other for the odd Paul Mason article you come across, or Owen Jones, that tries to weave a story. We've got to be better. The left has always got to be better than the right, because the hard right seductively go to the worst human instincts to get the votes.
I really want to address this point about, I think, the strongest argument from those who support Remain for that cause is that basically they see kind of defeating Brexit as an attempt to defeat fascism. And for all the reasons that David just outlined, that what we've seen during this period of chaos, during this period of institutional breakdown, where increasingly people realize that the status quo is not benefiting them, where they realize that things are going to get worse for them, you know. And my generation, the generation of a lot of people in here is the first generation since 1881 that's going to be worse off than their parents. That's much more acute when you go to certain parts of the country. And that sense of anger, of disempowerment, is being channeled as it always does in these moments, as it literally always does during these moments of crisis created by capitalism and by the liberalism that supports it. You get this polarization and the use of, as you said, the worst instincts in humanity by the elite to attempt to divide working people amongst one another, to encourage them to blame immigrants, to blame criminals, to blame scroungers, to blame welfare queens, you know, whatever you want to call it, basically to attack one another rather than to look up and think, you know, look at the people that are shitting on us rather than just picking it up off the ground and throwing it at each other, to use a particularly horrible metaphor.
But a very good one.
The question then is, how do you defeat that? How do you defeat that? I mean, the Trumpian narrative is amazing because this idea of white supremacy that is woven into the entirety of what Trumpianism is, and particularly plays out in this trade war against China. This is playing into American sense of insecurity. On the one hand, that they as white men are being threatened, projected out onto their entire nation. Our entire nation is being threatened. I empathize with America because China is coming to get it, right? That's a very powerful narrative. And you can't just fight back against it by saying, be nice, right? You can't just be like, you know, we're nice. Look at us. We live in London, and we're telling you right now that you just need to be a bit nicer to each other. You're getting angry, and, you know, it's weird, and I don't really understand it, and you should just stop and just calm down. That's not going to work. We need to actually say, your anger is legitimate, right? And it's legitimate partly for some of the things that have been identified as part of this, you know, the Brexit debate, right? Partly because of the, you know, the rise of financial globalization, of the increasing power of international finance, of international monopolies, etc. But it is demonstrably not because of, you know, rising crime that's actually only recently risen as a result of austerity and has been falling for a very long time. It's not because migrants are coming over here and taking our jobs while simultaneously living off our benefits, right? And when you actually identify that the use and the exploitation of people's fears by an elite to try and get us to hate each other, when we actually should just be angry at them, people respond to that. They respond to that really well. And the best example of this is the campaign to elect Ilhan Omar in a very white state, right? And I know the person who ran this campaign, and her analysis was basically like, there are people on the left that think we should only talk about economics, and there are people on the left that think we should only talk about race. And both of them are wrong. You need to be able to connect people's deep anger about what I think is primarily economic issues without ignoring the fact that there is this constant bombardment of hate other people, hate other people, hate other people, and say this narrative is coming from people who don't want you to pay attention to any of the things that we really need to change. And, you know, it's not a question of just love each other and be nice to each other. It's actually a question of, if you really want any of these issues to change, you're looking at the wrong people. You're looking at the people who don't have any of the power, because the people at the top are misdirecting you towards that. And I think that's a much more powerful narrative than a liberal one.
I think, I mean, obviously, in terms of what story the Labour Party should be telling, I think most people will agree that that's it. There are, though, I suppose when it comes to practical policies on issues of law and order or borders or whatever, that the left, at least, you know, sometimes struggle to articulate what it is that they actually want. And I know that, Paul, you've dedicated quite a lot of time to trying to, well, in your words, sort of make the left get real about what you have to offer to become a party of government. And I don't know how that fits into this fight against an authoritarian Conservative party.
The narrative problem, I live in Vauxhall. On current projections, we're going to lose Vauxhall and Southwark to the Lib Dems, fail to take Putney, possibly lose Chukwuemeka takes Westminster. That's what's going to happen. But actually, I know how to stop that. I know to stop it by being pro-Remain. And it doesn't cause me a narrative problem. What causes me a narrative problem is when I campaigned in Walsall in the Midlands, and I was sent there to go and help take some council seats in the council election. We lost them. We lost the council. Why? Because there was a community who had fairly nice houses. I call them working class people, fairly nice houses, and what they'd done is they started putting bars across their drives, because they had driveways and semis, okay? And the bars were there to stop their cars getting nicked off the driveway. And there was a traveller camp nearby, and they associated in their minds that traveller camp with the nicking, okay? Labour, when confronted with the fact that this community had an impromptu WhatsApp neighbourhood watch, as well as the bars, the kind of lock and key, said they want nothing to do with this because it's vigilantism. Okay. Now, what do you think about that community? Good or bad?
Come on, he's put you on the spot now. Hands up for good.
Would you have a WhatsApp group to watch out for people stealing your car, and then would you be kind of hyper, like opening the door, going, They were Sikh. They were all Sikhs. It was an overwhelmingly Sikh area. So it's not, i.e., for us, the law and order thing, there's a lot of squeamishness about this, especially in what I call the Corbyn wing of the Labour Party. I think we've got to be able to say, being stolen from when you can't get insurance, when the police are not interested in you, is a class issue. Okay? So,
Yes.
However, we're not interested in the Priti Patel make criminals frightened, because that criminal who stole all my camera equipment 5 years ago is a 15-year-old kid from down my road. And what I want to be able to say is, right, the police should arrest him. Yeah? He should be rehabilitated in prison. But if we go, crime is caused by capitalism, and there's a lot of lawyers in our party, and some of them are a little bit squeamish. I'm not squeamish about law and order as a class issue, but what that story is meant to illustrate is, if you just listen and tell a better story, that's the art of being on the doorstep. What we often do is they go, I'm fucked off with crime. Crime's shit round here. And you go, yeah, we're going to create some jobs. It was the same when they were talking about migration. They said, it's all the migrants. And we'd say, well, we're going to invest in the health service. You've got to say, I hear what you're saying. And you've got to develop the art. I'm talking to you now in the audience. In a few weeks' time, the art, because you won't be campaigning here in Brighton, you'll be sent somewhere where we really need you, where they're going to say, who the effing hell are you? And you've got to say, I hear what you're saying, but what about this story? And I think we've all got it. What you said, I don't disagree with a word you said, but it's learning the art of telling a better story based on exactly that. If we're not the insurgency, when we're faced with a right-wing, Hannah Arendt called it the right in the 30s, it's the alliance of the elite and the mob. And if we haven't got a strong emotive argument, that is a fatal alliance. The elite have all the power. And when I say the mob, these are her words. I would never use that word now. But it's the idea of people who've given up, people who've sensed destruction, and they want to become a destructive force. We've got, we've got a... let me spin. On Stoke-on-Trent, why did Gareth Snell win? The MP, because we worked out a way of neutralising it. And you know what it was? They were all going around on Facebook saying, if it's not a revolution, if the UKIP isn't a revolution, I'm not interested. If it's just same old politics, I'm not interested. And we were able to reinforce that message in Stoke-on-Trent and say, you know what, UKIP's not a revolution, it's just a bunch of Tories. And working class support for UKIP was still strong, but not strong enough. And what happened is it switched to the Tories. No, that's not ideal. But the idea that but we won. We won. This will be the case all over where I come from. If we can make the Brexit party and the Tory party fight each other about who the revolutionaries really are, and then we can tell a story of hope, I think this is why I want an election. We can win an election.
I'm going to get some questions from YouTube and from the audience in a moment. First of all, I just want to bring up one more issue, which is going to be, I suppose, key to the next general election and to the future of Labour, which is what we titled the show, which is we're all here having a discussion about what Labour's policy should be. Obviously, Labour policy and Labour strategy isn't executed by people having a polite discussion on a stage. It's a bunch of... It's machinations between different groups with different interests.
Oh, I was going to say it's about class war, but sure.
No, I mean within the party. Sometimes it's class war, sometimes it's just people being dicks to each other, and sometimes it's people trying to cling on to their positions. But in any case, that's going to become too leading of a question. So what are the challenges within the Labour Party for any kind of... Because, again, I think many strategies have been articulated tonight that would be quite good. The worst thing we could do is not have a strategy. And I think the danger at the moment in the Labour Party is that we end up with something that's not quite like a strategy. And that's not because no one thought of it, it's because that would be the result of the compromises that are reached in the internal struggles of a party which at times looks quite dysfunctional. And I'm expecting that you might all each have slightly different ideas as to how that can be resolved as we go forward. I'll start with Grace. I think you might be provocative on this one.
How did you know? I'm going to not disagree, but challenge the idea that strategy is what we're lacking. And basically because I think there is, we can overstate the divides on the left, but I think there still is, to a significant extent, a divide between people who think that history is driven forward by debates between people who have different ideas, and people who think history is driven forward by battles between different groups in society which exist in fundamentally antagonistic relationships with one another. Basically, whether or not you think history is driven forward by ideas or whether it's driven forward by class politics. And I think it's driven forward by both, right? I mean, obviously, those two things are not, there's not one or the other. You have, ideology and ideas, and they develop in relationship to the balance of power between different class forces on the ground, of course. But for a very long time, we've only focused on the ideas. And we've been like, we need to be clever. We need to come up with the right things, say the right things, come up with clever policy ideas, try and, promote this idea that we are delivering innovations, evidence-based policy in line with the national interest. That will, promote the greatest number of good for the greatest number of people, right? This is just the classic basis of liberalism. When actually, the role of the Labour Party should be to rebalance power in society away from people who live off wealth and towards people who live off work. That was the basis of the success of Thatcherism. It was effectively... Thatcher basically used the state as a tool of class war. I've said this before, I've said this many, many times, I'm not going to stop saying it, because, so many people in the Labour Party get accused of class war. We have to just recognise the fact that actually the antagonistic relationship between different classes, overlain by antagonistic relationships between other different social groups, because capitalism is not just a system of economic exploitation, it is also a system of gender exploitation, race exploitation, of imperialism, of white supremacy. But they all, are interlinked ultimately with this relationship between the people who own the stuff, predominantly rich white men in the global north, and everyone else who works for a living and who are exploited in various different ways. And, the intensity of that exploitation depends upon what social group you're from. But ultimately, that is I keep coming back to this, but I do think it is the main divide. And delivering a strategy, therefore, means getting people to understand that we're the ones with the power, right? Because for so long, working people in this country have been disempowered by a narrative that says the clever people at the top will make the decisions for you. History is over. There is no alternative. Capitalism has won. Socialism is dead. There is no other way of organising the economy. We're just going to kind of perfect by tinkering around the edges and handing over control to the experts. Actually, bullshit. We're the ones that work and create the value. We're the ones that pay the taxes. We're the ones that make society function. Working people, i.e. everyone in this country that works for a wage, which is the vast majority of people in this country, are the ones with the power. Labour's strategy should be to polarise that division, give people a sense of their own power, and get them to fight for the things that they think are in their interests. And that's why this conference has been so exciting, because it's been member-driven. It's been driven by, the Labour movement, right? It's not just been people at the top telling us this is what you need to do to win socialism. It's us saying this is what we think socialism means. That's really exciting.
So I actually want to return to that Thatcher example, I suppose, to get to the point of what I was trying to make about divisions within the party, right? So Maggie Thatcher came to power. Obviously, she was enormously successful at implementing her project. Obviously, we disagree with everything she did, but she utilised the state to wage class war and essentially won over a decade. But it was quite difficult for the first 2 years. So she had to have a party who would back her when inflation was going up to 10, 20%, or unemployment. I can't remember. It was unemployment that went up to 10, 20%. you know, and she was looking poor in the polls, and it looked like the bet she'd made was potentially not going to pay off, right? And so it took some time before people could see, oh, actually, this project does make sense and it does work, and yeah, she is actually going to change Britain. Now, if Jeremy Corbyn gets into power, and in the first 6 months, the first 12 months, the first 18 months, things look pretty tough. You know, he's tanking in the polls. Potentially, I don't think we would be in a recession if he gets into power. But ultimately, you're going to have the establishment who are really trying to attack this guy, business elites, the media, and he's going to look weak. And unlike Thatcher, he's not going to have, in my mind, that I'd predict, a party who's going to say, this is fine, we'll stay behind you, we'll go through the tough times because we can imagine something positive at the end. And for me, that's going to be an essential weakness of any Corbyn government, which is that as soon as... I don't think the majority of Labour's MPs actively want to undermine a Jeremy Corbyn government. I think a lot do. But my worry is the moment the going gets tough, about 200 MPs are basically going to say, fuck it, we're out, sorry. But you're already sitting on the benches. So I don't know if you're someone who sits in Parliament. Do you think that the constitution of the PLP as it's currently made up is giving Corbyn an unfair disadvantage in a project of entering government and then transforming Britain?
Look, I think in the end, the key word that you've been using, Michael, is power, right? And we want to get to power to the people and the agenda that Grace has so wonderfully set out. But we have to take power first. And the other phrase you used was strategy. We have to have a clear strategy to get power. Now, look, I've got to be frank. What I see on the right of politics, and let's be clear, far-right politics has now entered the mainstream, and why it fills me with horror on behalf of the people I represent, is I see a very clear strategy. I see money and resource. I see people I despise, you know, Linton Crosby, Dominic Cummings, Rupert Murdoch. But this is serious organisation. I bloody respect them because I know they know their shit. And the consequences of them winning are huge, where they will take this country over the next period. I've got to say, I then turn to my own party, my own tradition. Do I see the unity and single-mindedness of purpose to actually seize power so you can give power away? I don't. Do I see the unity of narrative story that we need to tell to be deeply persuasive? I've got to tell you, I can see Paul shake. I don't quite see it. We have to raise our game. It's not just the theory of what we want to do. It's how we get there. And how, in the end, in politics, in this country, with two major parties, you usually have to create quite a big tent in order to certainly govern for a period, because the smaller your majority, the less likely you are to get that second term. I've got to say, on the practicalities of this, whether we will be a majority government, I think, is a question mark. It is very likely that we will have a confidence and supply situation with the Scottish nationalists, who will want another referendum in Scotland about their independence. And with, and you can say Joe Swinson, but I think the better way to understand it is Chuka Umunna's Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
Putting the brakes on some of the vision that you've just outlined. That's the practical reality of where we may be. So I'm glad that we are coming out of this conference, in part because of wonderful Lady Hale and that decision, and also because of fantastic policy announcements in the last few days, and we've got more to come. We're coming out in a better place, but we need to be pretty single-minded about how you get that power, not just about how you give power away if you get it. And I'm sorry, on behalf of the people I represent, I've got to be insistent about that, because they aren't in this room. They look in on politics occasionally. They're on those zero-hour contracts. They've got that manager that's racist, but they've got to keep their mouth quiet. All those sorts of things that go on, that precarious lifestyle that exists in our society. And they need to smell and see a Labour government that wants it as much as they can see Boris Johnson does.
Yeah. So, let's get, which is my camera? That one. I'm going to say something down the barrel, Jeremy Paxman style. Look, the number one thing is that if any Labour MP is thinking of challenging Jeremy for leadership at this moment when the bourgeoisie and the elite are in crisis, fuck them. You know, that's what I say. And I say this in a non-theoretical way because I think it's coming. Yeah. Number one, we don't need any more divisions.
Absolutely.
Number two, that we need a strong narrative in this election, and I think we can create one. Actually, around the second referendum. Second referendum is what we say to get over the Brexit problem, and then, okay, the answer is you decide. We want to rebuild Britain. You decide, and here's our policies for that. So we get on to, you know, we try and get it out of the way using the second referendum, which we've agreed on, and then we go, right, but now we're going to talk about the economics and the democracy and all the other things that people are interested in. I think I want to warn people about one thing, though, that there is a culture war. And there's been a debate on the left, including here in Navarra, do you refuse it? Like in the military, you can refuse battle. Do you want to refuse culture war? I don't, it's increasingly unlikely. One part of it, places where I come from, like Wigan and Lee, it's there. My school friends, when I was 5, you know, they became miners, I became economics editor of the BBC. Yeah? They now sit in working men's clubs, this is the way they put it, with fascists at that end, momentum at this end, and there's no centre. You know, because there's no teachers, there's no doctors, there's no lawyers. It's just them. They're fighting that battle. They know how to do it. We just need to give them support. But the other part of the culture war is this. I saw our party lose Scotland. I reported on it. And I know what happened is our own people decided that there was that they wanted the union. Okay, that was Labour's position. And lots of SNP people wanted independence, notwithstanding that the majority of the Scottish working class wants independence. The majority of Unite members in Scotland backed the SNP. It became a us and them. And Labour started to define itself against this thing called the indie ref people. I'm now observing this in our own party, not about people like me who support Remain, but around Remainiacs, right? Okay, Remainiacs with their baguettes and their silly berets, right? Okay, and I'm not a big fan of them, but what you've got to realise is they are on 24% voting for the Liberal Democrats here and the SNP in Scotland. And if we start to see them culturally as other than us, and this is the narrative. It's your fault the Tories have won because you voted the fucking Liberal Democrats when you could have voted for us. What are you doing, you traitors? That is the route to losing. Yeah. And I think that I would say we've got to be able to, and it's a really tough thing. This is why I think we're going to have locally based campaigns, you know, so that Lisa Nandy and Elaine Fauvargue and Joe Platt, and where I come from, Wigan and Lee, they're going to have to go and have a locally based campaign that takes as read that 60 to 70% of the population wants leave. So that's their campaign. Me in Vauxhall, I struggle to find anybody who's not a member of the far left who wants leave. So we're going to have a campaign aimed at that. And what's the concomitant of that? Let me, again, throw some, you know, let me put vinegar on your chips, as we say. Jeremy Corbyn is on a -60 approval rating. And this is a problem. I love him. I support him. I don't want anybody to challenge him. But he's on a -60. Why? Because in socially conservative working class areas, he's seen as other. And increasingly, in places like Vauxhall and Putney, he's seen as not serious about fighting Brexit. Now, we can overcome that. Professional advisors and strategists can overcome that. But for me, what I want to see is a collegiate leadership. I want us to go as Blair, Brown and Prescott did. You know, Blair, Brown and Prescott wasn't Blair, Southerner, you know, posh Southerner. Gordon, you know, son of the man, Scottish. We won Scotland in that election. Prescott, northern working class. I think, I know, of course, big downside, they're all white, they're all male. But I want to see people like Laura Peacock, people like Rebecca Long-Bailey, right at the front of our campaign. Just as much as I want to see, you know, their southern equivalents. I think we've got to realise that this horrible cultural conflict that we're going through has created huge enmities between parts of the United Kingdom. We want some Scottish people in the cabinet. And I'm afraid, this is the final thing, that I can't see the legitimacy of a Labour government that doesn't have the Scottish National Party in the cabinet. Because if they wipe us out, all right, suppose we retain 10 seats, fine. If they wipe us out and we're down to 1, like the Tories, and the Tories are down to 0, how can the government of the United Kingdom represent United Kingdom? So I think, sadly, because I don't agree with the SNP, that their case for being in the government will be incredibly strong, and they'll play that. And I just hope that doesn't play into the dynamics of the election, but I think it might.
We're going to go to questions quite quickly because that's what Gary's WhatsApping me, and he's the boss.
Gary.
This one is from Niall Glynn. It's directed to you, David, and I'm not going to say it in an accusatory voice. Who is responsible for the division you see in Labour?
Oh, God, look, look, you've got to understand, I have hated...
I don't think the implication was it was you.
Yeah, I mean, I hate factions. I hate them. I hate cliques. I was bullied at school. I didn't, I was a minority in all of the, school and university and stuff. So I've never really joined anything. I just do my own thing. So I see issues on both sides of the traditional divide. I've taken issue with, and let's be clear, I nominated Jeremy first time round, and I did not participate in the coup attempt second time round. So I see problems with both factions at either end of our party, and I take the general view that we have to be a broad church that can hold everyone in it. So I don't want to allocate blame, but I would say I don't think it's sensible to go into a conference before an election with what looks like tribal warfare. I just don't think that's clever. I think the public are looking in, they want to hear what you're about, what you're going to do for them, and that was unattractive. I'm glad we've ended in a better place, but we shouldn't have started there.
It was a muted round of applause for...
Tom Watson's at the back.
Let's take some questions from the audience. Has anyone put your hands up if you've got a question? And keep them kind of quick because, one, we're on a tight schedule, and also I'm going to have to repeat them back for the audience on YouTube. Yes, there. Ooh, interesting. Good one. At a time of national emergency, should we be embracing a progressive alliance?
Look, there's two scenarios. One is that Johnson and Farage make an overt pact. In that situation, I think that is they'll win. They'll win big time, 60 majority, and then forget the NHS. And forget climate change, by the way. Forget the zero carbon. It's gone. Because you've only got 10 years to do it. 5 of them occupied by Johnson and Farage. They put them in the Lords. If they do that, if you seriously want to stick to tribalism of we can't make any agreements with any other parties, in fact, round here, my sources tell me that very few of our Labour comrades actually did campaign against Caroline Lucas. Very few. Instead, they went to places where they could do better. So either we do it formally or we do it informally. If they don't form a pact, and in fact they fight each other, then I think you can have a bit more of normal politics. But the way it looks is that it's not like we're calling for people to have like a formal alliance, but if there was tactical voting between Lib Dems, Labour, Green, and nationalist parties, the nationalist parties it barely matters because they're going to, SNP are going to win, and Plaid are stuck where they are. It matters between Lib Dems and Labour, and there's only 10 seats where it actually is where it's a problem, where the Lib Dems have a chance of taking a seat from us. In general, if the Lib Dems tactically voted for us, we'd win by 60. And now, I advocated tactical voting last time, and I wasn't expelled. I just hope that if it comes down to it, in the 4 days before, when we look at what the actual polls are, that people like me are allowed to say, so I've got a profile that says, he's a left-winger but pro-Remain. Come on, guys, in Putney, Labour's ahead, right? Why would you split it and give it back to the Tories? That's all. I want the power to say that, but what's the quid pro quo? I might have to accept that in some places, we're not... Yeah, I'm not going to even say it here because I don't want to be expelled. Yes. But there might have to be tactical voting the other way.
I don't have a problem with Labour talking to the Green Party. Labour talking to the Liberal Party is an entirely different thing altogether. And I'm not going to bang the drum about austerity because it's been done many, many times before. I think there is just a fundamentally different attitude to how power works, to how government works, to how we need to reform the country. And I basically think that's because liberalism, as well-intentioned as it is, and as historically, it has played a very significant role in the formation of the Labour Party and the development of our policy proposals, and often in the way that the Labour Party has won power. But liberalism is fundamentally based on an ethic of altruism. It's basically, we have the power, we're rich, we're wealthy, we're not badly off, and we think that other people shouldn't be that badly off, so we'll give stuff away. Socialism is fundamentally opposed to that because it is based on empowering people from the ground up. It's not about giving stuff away. It's not about saying, we want you to be nice and we want, wealthy people who own all the stuff and control all the rules and whatever to actually just, look into their consciences and develop a system. Jeff Bezos, just stop being so mean, right? Ultimately, it will be better for you over the long run. This is ultimately what's driven liberalism for a very, very long time. People like Keynes, who, ultimately did quite a lot for the left over the course of the post-war period. But ultimately, his strategy was one that was aimed at saving capitalism. He was like, we need more enlightened, wealthy people to give more stuff away, to be less exploitative, so that the working classes don't get really annoyed and realize how powerful they are. And that is the problem with an alliance with the Liberal Democrats, because that ethic is not just, for me, intellectually, morally wrong. It's really patronizing, and it's what pisses a lot of people off about the way that Labour ordinarily acts. It's like, we're up here, we're giving you stuff away because you're poor and, you don't have any power. That's not what Labour is about. Labour is about restoring people of a sense of their own power. It's about making people realize that they create the wealth, they do the stuff, they pay the taxes. If we stopped working, if we stopped doing what we do, the entire system would grind to a halt. And that's just completely antagonistic to the way that the Lib Dems work. And they know that. Yeah. That's why they've said they'll never go into coalition with Labour, but they will happily, presumably, do it again with the Tories. So, fine, with the Greens, with the SNP, I personally would not want Scotland to be independent, but I've also said that I think they should have the right to choose that. And, the same with Plaid, whoever else. I can imagine a situation in which, obviously, in a majoritarian electoral system where you've got regionally, geographically concentrated votes, you'd need to cooperate after the fact. And with the Greens, maybe you'd talk about doing that before the fact. But with the Lib Dems, it's just a completely... they're Tories. They're Tories, they're nice
the new Tories, in fact. They are the new Tories.
David.
So, look, I think that we do need an alliance. I think we've got to work together in places. An example of this is I will do everything in my power to see us win Uxbridge. And if that means we should put one candidate up and parties need to work together against Boris Johnson, I think we should do that. So there are strategic places where we should box very clever indeed.
Let's take one last question. And if there is a woman with a question, then because we... No? Well, yes.
No. There is no.
I suppose I'm lowering the tone.
It couldn't be lower.
I was hoping for lowering the tone. I thought that would be a nice end to the show.
That level of the discussion. All the time I've been listening to you, I'm thinking that I'm spending the whole of my time knocking on doors in a place called Kingsmead. It's South Bristol, it's actually in Gloucester, South Gloucester. And it's a possible seat. And at the moment we're doing an information, getting to know you kind of, we're not just knocking on the door and saying what you're going to. We're trying to engage in conversations. And at one door, when you finally get down to it, they will give your name,
No, I think that can be made into a question. And it's a shame, actually, that our viewers on YouTube didn't hear that, because it was a good anecdote, actually. So that was a story about campaigning in, where was it, Kingsmead, which is just outside?
Kingsmead, Bristol.
Kingswood, near Bristol, or in Bristol. And it was the idea that knocking on doors, campaigning for a general election, it actually seems that people's number one issue isn't Brexit and Leave, and that maybe us on the panel, or those of us who think that Leave and Remain is the key divide, have managed to get caught in a media bubble where potentially they're failing to see the wood from the trees. And actually, if Labour just have a popular manifesto and try and, somewhat, I suppose, ignore Brexit or sidestep the Brexit question.
At the moment, we don't bring it up unless they do, but that may well happen.
So could we have 2017 again, I suppose, is one other way of putting it, to put the question in your mouth. Let's go to you first, David.
Yeah, well, this time we want to win. We didn't win in 2017. We want to win. I mean, I think you're right. I think that Brexit is not the only story. I find it sad that so much of the electorate think that we're a bunch of fools and what we've been doing. They don't understand it. And I think that is a tension between a sort of sovereign parliament and a sovereign democracy, if you like, and direct democracy, which is what a referendum was. You kind of ask the people. The questions that were asked, I don't think were very clear. The information wasn't very clear, and we're in a mess as a consequence of that. But the real challenge is getting on to what we want to talk about and being heard. Now, the good news is, all general elections I've been part of, and I think I've been part of 6, start with the government of the day saying, this is what the election's about, and end, over those 4, 5, 6 weeks, depending on how long, a whole range of issues have come up. Events have overtaken. Last time round, very sadly, we had 2 terrorist events. So actually, it's very likely that if we get that general election, whilst, of course, it will begin on Brexit, it may well not end on Brexit, and other issues will be heard. However, one of my frustrations, and this is the kind of this is the sort of darker, tougher side of getting onto the agenda, is there are still a range of hugely, hugely important issues to people that do not get properly discussed during elections. I mean, I was really, really upset during the last general election that the issue of housing barely got a look in. And I thought it was poignant and painful that just days after the election, when Grenfell Tower burnt to the ground and 72 people lost their lives, finally we got a debate about housing that we should have been having during the general election. And so we're in a slightly new age. Social media, outfits like this one, pushing issues to people that the mainstream media tend to want to ignore. And that will obviously affect the election. But the point is, getting past the noise of Brexit, I still return to, and it's why I almost want to separate the two.
Grace.
I think that going into the next election, our greatest asset in terms of spreading the message that I think we want to spread, and I think most of us agree with what you just said, that Labour wins when we focus on the issues that directly affect people's lives, that we can say to them, this is, you're going to be better off in this way with a Labour government. Your rents are going to be lower, you're going to be able to afford social care, you're going to have more bargaining power in the workplace, you're going to have more voice in the decisions that affect your lives. Never, albeit sidestepping the issues that often come up on the way to that conversation, not saying, yes, well, legitimate concerns about immigration, but let's talk about something else. Actually saying, well, a big reason that debate is happening is so that we don't talk about these big issues that actually really affect your standards of living. And if we, look at it, then the biggest reason that you aren't able to afford to house yourself is because Thatcher privatised all the social housing, and now it's all owned by a tiny bunch of landlords who just charge whatever the hell they want because they have all the power over the economic system. So I don't think we need to sidestep those issues that surround Brexit. I think we need to go through them and address them. But in terms of the strategy, I think the most important point is actually is twofold. Firstly, it's in terms of the content. I think we need a much greater sense of oppositionality. So we need to constantly, in every single issue that we are bringing up, we need to highlight the divide that we want to highlight. The private schools thing is manna from heaven. 7% of the country, a lot of people getting very, very angry about this and just amplifying our message. The people that are having aneurysms about the fact that we're going to get rid of private schools are doing us a huge favor. That's great. The vast majority of people in this country know instinctively that the system that we have in terms of education, particularly when it comes to charitable status, is deeply unfair.
Rigged.
But the second, it's rigged, exactly. The second, and I think probably the most important one, comes in terms of strategy and of how we campaign. And that means mobilizing. Now, for a long time, we focused on kind of top-down media interventions, big speeches, particular communications, press strategies, etc. The biggest asset that Labour has, and the reason that we won the last election, arguably, maybe just as much, if not more than, the policies that we were announcing, is the fact that people on the ground were inspired as hell, and they were going out to people that they trust and who trust them, 5 or 6 people, and saying, Labour's going to do this. How much more powerful is it hearing from your friend, your colleague, your cousin, your co-worker, Labour is going to do this for you, than it is hearing some people on the ground to go out on those doorsteps to talk about the issues that they're passionate about, yes, on the doorstep, also in their workplaces, in their communities, in every aspect of their lives, because that's what will win us the last election. We have 500,000 people who are so passionate about the ideas and the vision and the mission of the Labour Party that they'll pay money to attend boring meetings every month, right? Like, that's a massive asset, and I don't think we're currently using it well enough. So I think developing that passion and really mobilizing people on the ground is the key to winning the next election.
I just want to read you from an advert I found in an employment agency in Brighton, just when I came here. Care assistant, Brighton, the leafy southeast. Nights, 9 p.m. to 8:15 a.m. So that's, what is it, 11 hours 15, 8.77 an hour. 8.77 an hour. So the first thing I want to, the first thing I'm going to talk about, and we know this works, is £10 an hour. Tomorrow, when you vote for us, you get £10 an hour, minimum. Okay, and there'll be no messing around, no fines, you'll have power to speak about what you want in the workplace. By the way, that's the basic job. There'll be career, we will make sure that people there'll be state-funded training. There'll be ways for you to get off an £8 an hour job or a £10 an hour job into a £15 an hour job. That's what Labour stands for. That's why they're called Labour. Yeah. No, I think if we start talking about that, if we start talking about the concrete offers that we have got, and when it comes to fiscal policy, never use the word fiscal policy. It's about what we're going to spend on you, on your behalf. And John McDonnell's team have been going round to businesses, visiting towns, saying, what would you like our 250 billion to be spent on? But when we know what it is, I spent some time in a Welsh hospital, which unfortunately is controlled by Labour in Wales, with a member of my family for 10 hours in A&E. Every nurse or doctor we saw was foreign. But the reason why we spent 10 hours is because there weren't enough of them, by the way. So we go, guess what? On day one, tomorrow, when John McDonnell does his emergency budget, there'll be 20, 30 adverts put in the local paper for new care assistants, doctors, etc., to make this A&E run properly. Some of them will be from Eastern Europe. But do you want that, or do you want to be not to be treated? And that, if we talk about concreteness, I think where you're from, the lady at the back, that's how we do it. Your place sounds entirely winnable to me. What we're up against in some of the places in the north where I come from, I canvassed last time. Where I come from, 65% leave, overwhelming Labour. We knew within an hour of canvassing that they love Brexit, but they love Labour more. That's actually true. But there are places that are not like that, and they've gone over the edge. And there, we're just going to have to be very, very use all these things you've just talked about. The power of peers, of your peers having the argument. So what we're going to try and do is mobilise the power of the video selfie. We want hundreds of working class people saying in 1 minute, I'm voting Labour. I'm voting Labour. I'm from here. I'm from Wigan, Leigh, Prestwich, wherever you are from. I'm from Brighton. I'm from Kingswood. And I'm voting Labour. And what I hope is this. Send it to 10 of your friends. Tell them to do the same. This is how you counteract this insidious thing. I hope you all know about it. In many of those places that have been, they're called leave areas. Well, I don't call them a leave area. They're just places that have been devastated. The social media is full of myths and scare stories about Labour. In Merthyr Tydfil, there's a Facebook group of 17,000 people, a population of 50,000, dedicated to shitbagging Labour and the Labour Council because they feel betrayed by Labour. That started out as an anti-Labour Facebook page. Now who's on it? Tommy Robinson, right? Now who's on it? You're all paedophiles. No. We are up against that, and we have to. I don't want to use those tactics, but you have to use the power of not altruism, because you're absolutely right. Liberalism has no purchase in those communities, but the power of solidarity, the power of telling each other stories, and that's for me what will win us the election. And it's why I come back to it. I want one now. I quite happily have one now because I think we've got the people and the story to tell, especially and one other thing, climate change. We've got the story. Every Merthyr Tydfil, your place, Wigan, Leigh, have got 16-year-olds who don't want to die on a burning planet. Doesn't matter what their parents voted, whether they're in Glasgow with from Rangers or Celtic. They don't want to die on a burning planet. So our policy is the most powerful thing. It goes into families. It will take our brand right into the family dinner table every night. What are you doing, Dad? What the fuck are you doing voting for a party that's going to burn the planet when Jeremy Corbyn is going to save us? That's what we're going to do.
Can I get a round of applause for our entire panel? David Lammy, Grace Blakeley and Paul Mason. And a round of applause for everyone who made this event possible. So that's the Novara Media team, the TWT team, and the latest TV bar. And thank you for watching at home. As ever, this is only possible, Novara Media is only possible because of your kind support. If you do have the means, please donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month to support.novaramedia.com or give us a one-off donation so we can move to a nicer studio. We'll be back at some point, not quite sure when, maybe tomorrow, maybe next Tuesday. Good night.
Good one.
I learned shitloads. I know, I'm going to